You are watching or listening to Purham and Associates. For more information, go to rpurham.com or follow me on all social media platforms and subscribe at RPURHAM. Thanks. See you over there. Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to Purham and Associates. I'm your host, Randy Purham. Hey, I hope you all had a fantastic weekend and you stayed out of trouble and you didn't do anything stupid amidst of all the craziness that's going on out there right now. But that's okay. Crazy is good as long as it's controlled and you know what you're doing. But hey, whatever. Hey, we got a very special guest with us today, and I'm actually very, very excited to talk to this gentleman. Y'all will enjoy this one. We have none other than Maaneli Derakshani. He is a senior science advisor at the CO2 Coalition. Maaneli, or Max, Derakshani is a theoretical physicist and philosopher of physics with a PhD in the foundations of physics from Utrecht University in 2017. He has previously, worked as a postdoc at Rutgers University, New Brunswick Department of Mathematics, and Utrecht University Department of Mathematics. He is currently a fellow of the John Bell Institute for the Foundations of Physics and a member of the Foundational Questions Institute. Maaneli has published his research in journals such as Physical Review Letters, Physical Review A, Physical Letters A, Journal of Physics, Pure and Applied Mathematics Quarterly, Entropy, Symmetry, and Physics of Life Reviews. His research has been covered in Science, New Science, Eureka Alert, Phys.org, and the Clubhouse show It's About Time. Among other media outlets, he is also a recipient of grants from the Foundational Questions Institute and John Templeton Foundation, and received the top prize for the John Templeton Foundation's Ideas Challenge in 2020. Outside of physics, Maaneli, has contributed an essay. Another thing in this universe that cannot be an illusion, to the volume Sam Harris Critical Responses, and has given 2 presentations for the Tom Nelson podcast, Does Enzo Dominate Global Warming? Tom Nelson Pod number 81, and Enzo Warning versus CO2 Warming, Tom Nelson Pod number 89. Maaneli is also a member of the Manhattan Institute and works with them to promote their freer markets and more limited government. His shift to a more sensible view about climate change was initiated by reading Thomas Gale Moore's Climate of Fear, Why We Shouldn't Worry About Global Warming, a book enthusiastically endorsed by his favorite economist, Milton Friedman, for making a compelling case that global warming brings overwhelming new net benefits to humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing himself and presenting others, Mr. Maaneli Derakshani. Welcome, sir. Welcome. How you doing today?
Thank you, Randy. That was a very generous introduction.
Absolutely.
Honored to be here.
Very, very impressive background, sir. And Doc, I got to ask you. Well, first off, welcome to the show. I had one of your other colleagues, Gregory Wrightstone, on before on a couple occasions. But tell us more about what the CO, or remind the audience about what the CO2 Coalition does and who you guys are.
The CO2 Coalition is a nonprofit foundation that promotes or advocate or discusses or disseminates the science of CO2 and its role in climate, and it emphasizes the overwhelming benefits, environmental benefits, and the benefits to human well-being of carbon dioxide and increased carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere caused by man-made CO2 emissions. And we also push back against a lot of propaganda and misinformation, false information about global warming and the effects that that is having on climates. And we are generally of the view that CO2's role is negligible in contributing to global warming, and that it's most likely a natural rebound from the little ice age era several hundred years ago, and that we don't have any control over it, and that we shouldn't try to stop or curtail fossil fuel usage to prevent CO2 emissions, because CO2 is benefiting the planet globally through global greening. CO2 is essentially plant food, and it makes it easier for plants to grow and for forests to grow, and it makes land more farmable, as does modest global warming, such as what we've been seeing over the past century or so. So our broad mission is just to emphasize these points and to disseminate them to the public and also to educational institutions.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, because you do have these climate alarmists that exist, and they come on these media, the legacy media outlets, and you have some of the podcasters that entertain them. I don't, but you have they're out there, right? And the main thing that you constantly hear is that we're in this climate crisis. Oh, look at the weather changes, look at the patterns, and we got all these tornadoes coming, and these hurricanes and earthquakes and floods and all this stuff. And it's like these things have always existed. It's just a matter of the improvement of technology to track and monitor these things that is what makes it more prevalent in our purview. And so, but at the same token, there is understandable concern of man-made gases possibly affecting the climate. And to your point, it couldn't be further from the truth, because it's actually benefiting us. Talk to us more about that scope of the argument that CO2, man-made CO2 emissions, is harming us versus the benefit.
Sure. So the argument you'll hear from the, I would say, the most prestigious scientists on the climate, I would say, alarmist side of the issue is that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, so if we put more of it into the air, it's going to be able to trap more heat from radiating to space, and so the planet's temperatures will globally go up on average. And not only that, but there's another greenhouse gas in our atmosphere, water. It's actually the most prevalent greenhouse gas. And these climate alarmist proponents will say that there's this feedback effect between water and CO2. So as we put more CO2 into the atmosphere and that warms the planet, that enables it to trap or hold more water. If more water is in the air, then even more heat can be trapped than from just the warming effect of CO2.
Yeah.
And then if we put more CO2 into the atmosphere, this process will continue. And so we'll get this runaway, amplified feedback between water and CO2, causing runaway warming, and eventually will make the planet's surface uninhabitable for humans or for life in general.
Yeah,
because it will go up by 100 degrees or something. Yeah. That's the long-term concern. They say, well, we don't want it to scorch the planet and make it uninhabitable, so we have to stop emitting CO2. That's their point of view on it.
Yeah, but doctor,
Yeah.
we could just bust a hole in the ozone or into the atmosphere and let some of the gas escape in. We good to go, right? Because that's what that's the other prevailing I guess you could say argument there, because with NASA's Artemis 2, detractors of that whole thing, they're like, oh my God, these rocket ships are creating all this climate hazard and they're destroying our ozone and this and that and the third, and it's like, okay, if they're destroying the ozone or busting a hole into the stratosphere and all that, what's the problem with the CO2 being trapped? Because it's going to escape, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm not in this world, so tell me how this works.
Oh, well, so the good news is that this sort of alarmist argument that, oh no, there's going to be this runaway feedback effect between CO2 and water that's going to scorch the surface of the planet, it has no legitimacy or validity. For one thing, CO2's warming effects decrease as it becomes more prevalent in the atmosphere. So you have to essentially keep doubling the amount of CO2 in the air, the atmosphere,
to maintain
to
that.
produce the same amount of warming.
Right.
And even if you just double it, it produces by itself, assuming nothing else was at play, it would only produce about 3/4 of a degree Celsius of warming, which is too small to be felt or measured or to influence anything.
Yeah.
And then when you incorporate the role of water in the atmosphere, water essentially swamps out any influence of CO2 on planetary surface temperatures, so that actually the feedback from water is depressive or negative to the warming effect of CO2.
Right.
Essentially, CO2's contribution to the warming of the planet is de minimis or negligible. And so the bottom line is that we don't really need to do anything to prevent any runaway warming, because runaway warming cannot happen. It's physically impossible.
Impossible, yeah.
And
it makes sense.
And so
Yeah.
ozone is, we don't need to touch that. It's fine by its own. It varies. The ozone layer concentrations varies on its own naturally, and we don't really have much control over that either.
Right, and and I'm glad you mentioned about the water, and for those that are in the scientific world or pretend to be, like myself, H2O. Okay, so we're talking about hydrogen
Right.
and two oxygen molecules, and so with that, Earth itself is comprised of 70% of water. So to your point, if there's a concern about water being in the atmosphere and creating all this, extra CO2 and everything else, then you would think that, okay, and it's creating all this warming effect, that the water that's on land, the oceans, would be like drying up. But that's not the case. We're seeing that there's actually like more water. But I get it. People are crazy. so talk to us about that aspect of having the Earth itself being 70% water, and we have a land mass of 30%, and the carbon emissions benefiting not only Earth but also the wildlife, especially within the oceans and what have you. Talk to us about that piece of the pie.
Yeah.
People actually push back against that and say we're harming the environment by merely existing, and this is where you get those depopulist people that come into this fold too. So talk to us about that, because that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, your point about the Earth's surface being 70% water or so is very significant, because actually most of the energy or heat content of our planet, or at the surface of the planet, actually is in the oceans. And the ocean is continuously exchanging or putting heat into the atmosphere and taking heat from the atmosphere. And we know that there are these cycles where the ocean puts more heat into the atmosphere, sometimes for decades more than it takes away heat. And then there are decades where it takes away heat a little bit more, and vice versa. And there's a particular cycle like this ocean atmosphere cycle called El Nino and La Nina, which we're all familiar with.
Yes.
The El Nino is the warming phase. The La Nina is the cooling phase. And an interesting fact that's not well known is if you look at the patterns of El Ninos and La Ninas spanning, say, the past 40 or 50 years, you find that they're not even in the number or in the intensities. There are periods where El Ninos are much more frequent and stronger than La Ninas, and then there are periods where they're balanced, and then there are periods where La Ninas are a bit more. For the past 50 or so years that we've been measuring or observing global warming and, say, satellite records of global temperatures of the air, we find that the El Ninos and La Nina patterns very closely match that global warming pattern, period.
Gotcha.
And in fact, can explain virtually all of it. So that if anything is causing the warming of the planet, it's almost certainly this natural ocean atmosphere process of exchanging heat like El Nino and La Nina. So that's a very significant point that you raised about the oceans.
Yeah. Thank you. And you just mentioned something that I totally kind of like forgot about myself is the El Nino and La Nina. And with La Nina, if I'm not mistaken, that is the cooling period. And,
yes.
And so during my time living in Maryland, we had Snowmageddon, and that was like the period. It was like a lot of snowfall. And watching, the meteorologists on TV and everything else, and they just kept referencing like, well, we're in a very highly significant time of El Nino, and so the atmospheric pressure was greater, bringing in more water from the Atlantic, and that's what caused the greater snowfall. And so a lot of people, you could just see like it just glossed over people, when you're talking about it at work, being in the military and everything, and not, doing CBRN operations. They're just like, wait, what? Huh? So you're saying that because of El Nino, we have more snowfall now. And so you had to get into explaining what El Nino was and El Nino. And so when the summer came around, it was hotter in the summer, versus based on record temperatures during that time frame. So I love getting into this kind of stuff. I don't get into it enough, actually. So I'm glad we're talking about it today, and I know the audience is probably loving this as well. But I want to get into a little bit more of a controversial piece here. Over in Wiltshire, and ladies and gentlemen, Wiltshire is in England, for those that don't know. They built a giant dome, and it's been installed at a landfill for the purpose of growing fruit and vegetables using the site's gases. The landfill near Royal Wootton Basset, Wiltshire, already generates electricity from the methane produced by the waste and makes carbon dioxide as a byproduct of this process. The electricity will be used to power the prototype dome's fruit and veg operation for heating, lights, fans, and etc. And while the CO2 will be used to boost the plant growth, the landfill owners, Crapper and Sons and their community interest company, Sustain Wiltshire, hope to erect more than 100 such domes. Anyways, so with that idea of utilizing trash and letting it just sit and decompose, it creates CO2, and you trap it, and you're essentially using it as fertilizer to help grow.
Yeah.
Is that safe? Is that consumable, for humans? I'm just like thinking about the biochemistry behind decomposing food, and the off gases and everything else is being trapped in my food, and I'm eating that. I can't imagine that being safe. So talk to us about that, because that's crazy.
Well, if the CO2 molecules, the CO2 is pure. I mean, if they're just trapping the CO2 and the methane, and there are no other particulate matter, pollutants, in what they're trapping, then a CO2 molecule is just a CO2 molecule. It's going to be the same as the CO2 emitted from an oil refinery or from us exhaling from our mouths. So that CO2 will, might have a minor, it'll have some benefit if they put it into a greenhouse, for example, to grow vegetation or plants. Okay. Now, is it necessary to do this? I guess my question would be is why do they want to do this? Well, I mean, it sounds like maybe they are concerned with landfills just not being used for anything, or they want to somehow justify having landfills or put them to some use in some way.
Right.
But in that case, I would say, well, I mean, if we want to generate CO2, there are lots of ways that, you can do that are probably more efficient than harnessing it from landfills, and same with methane. But also I don't see any real problem with landfills as long as they're that garbage doesn't seep into like soil and whatever.
That's my concern.
That's just like common sense, I would say.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of like my concern.
They should build it properly.
Yeah, that's my concern. Is like, okay, are we talking like we're walking into this dome and then there's like a big pile of trash right here, and then you walk 20 feet and then there's a veggie garden right there. It's like, what are we doing here? So
yeah, but if they're doing that, I don't know.
That's
the smartest thing. But.
Now, to answer your question, or I'm going to attempt to answer your question about why would they be doing that, I see the concern of food deserts. Right, and we're seeing that as we're, I guess, as populations are dispersing from urban centers, they're getting more out into like rural parts of their geography. That there's a lack of options for food, so they plant, farm, and what have you, and so they're being creative in the sense of hey, let's utilize the trash that we're creating while we're living and utilize that to help produce produce. I could understand that logic. I just, like I said, going back to the consumability of it. Like, is that going to be a good thing to do? But I also look at the electricity generation from that. Can you talk to us about how the methane produces electricity? Because that's actually an interesting piece of the equation there. Talk to us how that works.
Well, methane, in a sense, broadly speaking, it's a hydrocarbon, and so I mean you could in principle use it for combustion and to drive an engine of some kind and to produce steam, but so. That can certainly be done. I suspect that they want to do that too because the price of energy is very high, especially in the United Kingdom. Right? This is in Wiltshire, you said, in
yes,
the UK. So energy prices are very high there, and in part because they do not, as a country, like to build their own fossil fuel plants, at least in the way that they used to in the past. Seems to me that it would be in their benefit to move away from their aversion, or to rather embrace fossil fuels again and deregulate the industry so that it's easier to build coal plants or natural gas plants and maybe even nuclear energy, if that's in their capabilities technologically, if they have the infrastructure for that, and just bring down the cost of electricity so that these farms in rural areas can have access to electricity more cheaply.
Right, and thank you for that. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's the thing that we're having an issue with here in Texas is data centers. Data centers coming in, consuming a lot of water. And then we're looking at bringing in more nuclear power plants into the rural areas of Texas to help generate more electricity and that. And and the oil fields. Which option would you go with to make it both efficient and environmentally friendly? Would you go with producing more oil and methane, or would you go with nuclear? Because a lot of people have pushback on nuclear, saying, "Oh, this is dangerous," or "What about the radioactive waste and everything else?" Talk to us about those dynamics, if you will.
I would say at the moment it's a better bet to go with natural gas and coal and oil to generate electricity. And the reason is because the nuclear energy industry is still heavily regulated to the point that it's very costly to build new nuclear power plants.
Right. Yeah.
Third generation type nuclear power plants. It's better, much better, regulation wise, is much better under the Trump administration than it has been under past administrations, because they've done already, they've taken significant steps to be reducing unnecessary regulations to lower the cost of construction. But it still is much easier to build fossil fuel plants and to generate electricity from those, at least for now. And in terms of safety, really not much reason to be alarmed about meltdowns occurring or causing a catastrophic environmental. Yeah, but the thing is, these new nuclear power plants, the modern ones, are designed to make them essentially impossible to melt. If they melt down, there are safety switches that can essentially ensure that no radioactive waste will be released into the surrounding environment. And even if it does, the influence of radioactive waste on surrounding soil environment is so greatly diluted by air and soil that it can't really have an effect on general populations. And if you look at just the number of deaths per kilowatt hour produced by nuclear energy going back to like 1980 or so, and you compare that to oil and gas, you find that nuclear energy is actually among the safest sources of electricity production. And that's even factoring in 3 Mile Island or the Chernobyl incident. Fukushima. Now, with modern plants, which are essentially impossible to become another 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or Fukushima, the chances of any sort of harm to human well-being or to the environment is essentially nil. So in the long run, I would say it would be great if Texas would embrace nuclear energy. But that might take some time.
Yeah, I agree. The NRC, as you pointed out, the Trump administration have taken great steps into reducing burdensome regulations and what have you. And the NRC announced recently how they're scaling back to allow the red tape to be cut easier to build nuclear plants, especially along the East Coast and the I want to say the northeast region of the United States. Not so much westbound, because you still got I guess you'll say liberal states that are pushing back and don't want these things, and they're actually increasing their regulatory guidance on these things to prohibit all of that. Would you say that there's going to be an imbalance of power being generated in the United States if that course continues in a trajectory that it is right now? And what I mean by that is, like, the west coast of the United States would be like starved of power, and you got over generation of power on the East Coast. Do you see something like that potentially being a problem or happening?
That's an interesting point. I suppose that's a possibility that, for example, a state like California, if they continue to try to build out more solar energy power plants and farms and wind farms, and they shut down all of their or they try to shut down more of their oil and gas and coal plants and shut down any remaining nuclear energy plants that they have, then they will definitely have problems with their electricity supply, whereas it will be in places like the Northeast or in Texas, for example, or coastal cities that have abundant electricity from nuclear energy plants or from fossil fuel plants. So perhaps that could happen at some point in the future.
Yeah.
And then it would be to see what the response would be from the state governors and these, blue states, so to speak.
They will
How
try
they would
to
react.
they will say they will encourage that they put in, transferable grids into like a pipeline, if you will. They would say, hey, y'all got all this power over there, so it's gonna be like a punishment for doing the hard work, and it's like, you give us some of that, so there's going to be this socialist mentality that's going to come into play, being pushed by these blue states. That's what I predict and see happening, because it's already happening here in Texas, where with the water supply, we have to run pipes up to Oklahoma and to other portions like down to Mexico to get water into Texas to sustain these data centers and these battery energy storage systems and stuff like that. So there's a lot of minutia behind it all, just playing in the background, that the general population either don't know what's happening, don't understand it, or don't care, because as long as they got their internet and and they can power up their computer, they don't care about how it got there. So we have these different interesting dynamics that's going on there. I want to change gears, Doctor, and talk about what's going on with the CO2 Coalition. What projects do y'all have coming up, or programs that y'all are pushing right now?
Well, right now we have a number of reports on various states, the climate histories of various states. So right now we're working on the state of Montana, and we will be putting out a report soon about Texas, actually, a Texas climate report. And we have reports about several other states in the works. We've already produced several state reports for other states like Virginia, but also many others, Wyoming, for example. And along with that, we are intervening in certain lawsuits against the EPA's recent repeal of the CO2 endangerment finding. A number of lawsuits have been placed to overturn this EPA ruling, which overturns an Obama-era ruling against emissions regulations related to CO2. So we're basically pushing back. We're intervening in those cases to push back against those appeals, because we think that the repeal of the CO2 endangerment finding by Lee Zeldin, the head of EPA, has been a wonderful development, long overdue, and we support it. So we're going to continue to help the EPA to keep that ruling in place. Yeah, and then we have a number of other scientific projects related to scientific studies of radiation in the atmosphere from greenhouse gases, something I'm working on with the founder and chairman of the board, Professor Will Happer at Princeton University. And we have op-eds and columns. And we have an education program for K through 12. A CO2 Learning Center, where we disseminate books and brochures and other resources for homeschoolers, for private schools, in principle, even for public schools, to push back against a lot of the disinformation about climate science and CO2 that is already in a lot of schools. Awesome. So we have a lot of different things going on, and active on the educational, scientific, legal, and to the extent that's possible, political side this issue.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to CO2coalition.org and you can see the plethora of resources and information there to help bolster or foster even your arguments, or just the education in general on CO2 and how it works and what it does and all that good stuff. And you'll find also that over the last few decades that I've been on Earth, anyways, I graduated through the different conversations of climate change. It started off in my earlier days. I remember the talk of greenhouse gases, the greenhouse emissions, and all of that. And then, but prior to that, in the '60s through the '80s, it was global cooling. It went to greenhouse gases, then it went to global warming, and now we're in, it's just climate change. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, just look at the history of this conversation and how scientists that's been in the game this entire time, and how they switched up based on the narratives that need to be pushed in order to stay alive. And you'll find all that stuff on the CO2coalition.org. I thank you for this conversation. It's really great. Tell people how they can follow you and support you, sir.
Yes, well, the CO2 Coalition is a nonprofit that accepts donations, and so people can donate to the CO2 Coalition as individuals. That is always welcome to support our work. I'm also active on X, at Max Derakshani on X, so people could follow me there as well. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and so many of us, Gregory Wrightstone is on LinkedIn, many other CO2 Coalition members too, as well as on X. So feel free to follow us in both social media outlets, and please consider donating to the CO2 Coalition.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Derakshani. I appreciate you, and be safe out there. And look forward to having you back on anytime that y'all have updates or want to give us some breaking news about, hey, there's a fireball coming, and it's going to turn into an ice ball by the time it hits the earth and all that good stuff. So I appreciate you once again, and take care. God bless, and be safe out there.
Thank you. God bless. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Maaneli Derakshani, Senior Science Advisor at the CO2 Coalition. Once again, I'm going to throw up the website for you all so y'all can write it down for those that may have missed it. It is www. or https rather, CO2coalition.org. And y'all can, like I said, go and check out their website. Plenty of information on this topic and other things. There is not just relegated to just climate stuff. It talks about all sorts of things on their scientific wise, and you put out those policy papers and read them. And for those that are into policies and working as lobbyists or legislatures and stuff like that, and you're trying to get ideas for bills for your upcoming legislative sessions, this is the place to go. And push that stuff. So check it out. And folks, with that being said, I have to jump up out of here and take care of some stuff. So y'all be safe, and don't forget. Don't forget. You gotta go pick up the book. Now available, Polarizing America. Wherever books are sold, go get that. Read that. Let me know what you think, and I will holler at you all later. Be safe. God bless, and ciao. I hope you enjoyed today's program. You can follow, like, share, subscribe on Spotify, Substack, Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, and your news. And also, you can download Let the Truth Be Told app on your favorite streaming platforms, such as Fire Stick, Apple TV, and Roku. Take care. God bless.